Hello. In today's lesson from the Greek New Testament, we're going to look at something that Jesus said to a woman named Martha about resurrection. Do people come back to life after dying? If so, when, why, and how? Well, Jesus addresses some of these questions in this passage that we're going to look at from the Gospel of John, chapter 11. First, we look at an interesting quote from Ramsay, Archbishop of Canterbury. The Eastern Church, he said, has clung to the resurrection in a way that in the West, Catholic and Protestant, the Western Church, has strangely missed. Interesting statement. And here is the passage, the clean Greek of the passage. In a minute we'll be putting different annotations and explanations to it, but I think it's important to start and finish with the clean Greek text. So it begins at John chapter 11 verse 23. Lege aute ho Jesus anastasetai ha adelphos su. Your brother will rise again. Lege auto he Martha. Martha says to him, Oida hoti anastasetai ente anastase ente escate hemera. I know that he will rise in the resurrection at the last day, sometime in the distant future. Apen aute ho Jesus, Jesus replies to her, Ego eimi, he Anastasius kai he Zoe, I am the resurrection and the life. Opistuon esiemi kan apothane zesetai. The one who believes in me, even though he dies, he will live. Kai pas hazon kai pistuon esiemi. Everyone alive who believes in me will not die forever. Do you believe this? Pistues tuto, lege auto, nae curie. She replies to him, Yes, Lord. Ego pepistuka, I believe that you are the Christ. Ha huios tu theu, ha eston cosmon erchomenos. And here is my English translation, not intended to be the last word. Jesus said to her, Your brother will come to life again. I know he'll come to life again on the final day when everyone will come to life. Martha replied, I am the source of all life, said Jesus. Or alternatively, we could translate it, I am resurrection, I am life. Those who have faith in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone alive who has faith in me will never ever die. Do you believe this? Notice how I used capital letters. Particularly note here, those who have faith in me, even though they die, small d, will live, capital L. So this is referring to ordinary physical death, and this is referring to what might be called spiritual life or life beyond. And everyone alive who has faith in me will never ever die, capital D, death. So that's referring to more than just physical death. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, Martha replied. I firmly believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who we've been waiting for. So a strong statement of faith by Martha. Certainly not what she expected that Jesus would say. It took her by surprise, but she is ready to make her strong affirmation. Of course, she knew Jesus. She knew him as a friend. She knew what he was like, and she was acquainted with his teaching. So she was ready, even when suddenly put on the spot, to make this affirmation of faith. So now, as we do in these lessons, which I've prepared, we go through this passage This time just a short passage, only 6 verses, but we're going to go through it 3 more times. And the first time we go through with an English translation word by word. So this, which I've put in blue here, is not a recommended translation, not a final worked on translation, but it's just giving an indication word by word of what the Greek is saying. So here we have it. Says to her, the Jesus, Anastasitai, he will rise. So this one word in Greek is represented by these 3 words in English, so I've put dashes between them. The brother, your. Lege says to him, the Martha, I know that he will rise in the resurrection in the last day. So notice that the use of the present tense here, it's called the historic present, and we do it sometimes in English when we're telling an informal story. Then he comes to me and he says to me, you should really blah blah blah. And so the informal style here does the same thing. Even though it's talking about something in the past, we're using the present here. Says to her, the Jesus, and yes, we note the word order, which is typical, actually from Hebrew, but influenced into the Greek New Testament. Verb, object, and then subject. More about that shortly. Now, for variation, we have a said. This is the past tense. Said to her, the Jesus. Ego eimi, I am, he Anastasis, the resurrection. Kai he Zoe, and the life. Apistuon, the believing one, in me, can, although apotane he die, zesitai, he will live. Kai and pas hozon, kai pistuon es eme, believing in me, ume, not, a double negative, die, es ta ton eona, to the age. Pistues tutor, do you believe this? Sorry about that little blip. Lege auto, she says, coming back to the present again, she says to him, yes, Lord, I have believed. So I here, and then the I part is also contained in the verb here as well. Hatisue, that you are the Christ, the Son of the God. Ha huios tu theu, ha eis ton kosmon erchomenos, the to the world coming one. Second pass through, this time I've written in green underneath, and these are comments on the grammar. And so noting here, as I said before, we start with the verb, back in verse 23 here at the beginning. Start with the verb and then pronoun object and then noun subject. So this is typical Bible order. Of course, the order in English would have to be Jesus says to her. Subject, verb, object. But here, typical Bible order, verb, pronoun object, and then noun subject. So I say object, but it's actually an indirect object, and it's in the dative case. So this is particular endings that nouns in Greek can take, and this one indicates the dative case and feminine. So the dative case is often, well, first approximation rendered in English as to. So, and here that's how we'll translate it. He says to her. Now Martha replies, and again we have verb, pronoun object, and noun subject. And again the pronoun object is an indirect object, and again it's in the dative case, but this time it's masculine. So the masculine ending is this. The feminine ending for the dative is here, and the masculine ending for the dative is here. And we will see that there are other endings as well. Unfortunately, it's not a case of one ending for one case. There are different ones, because here we have dative case again, and the ending is this EI. But in this case, it's the dative, not because it's saying to. This word means resurrection. It's not the dative because it's saying to the resurrection. But in this case, it's the dative because it's used with N. So the rule in Greek is if a noun follows N, meaning in, then it too has to go into the dative case. And this is also dative. So we see this ending again, same one as we had up here for the feminine. And then this other one as well. So we have, how many different endings do we have for the dative here? 3 or 4. But the interesting thing here is the way that Jesus teases out Martha's faith. She believed in a general resurrection sometime in the unknown future. By the way, it's interesting that she, an ordinary Jew and a woman, knowing that women didn't get so much education in those days, believed in the resurrection. The resurrection is taught in some places in the Old Testament, which of course was the Jews' Bible, the Jewish scriptures, but the resurrection seems to be denied in other places. A Jew of Moses' time or David's time could not have said what Martha said, her confident affirmation about the resurrection on the last day. So it leaves the question, did she learn it from Jesus or from the Pharisees? Well, that's an interesting question. Be that as it may, right now she needs to learn that Jesus has that power here and now. It's not just something for the unknown, distant future. The Urdu language that I helped translate the New Testament into has 2 different forms of the future tense. We had Jesus use the normal future form of the verb in verse 23, saying, your brother will rise. And then Martha in verse 24 uses the later future, clearly showing her different understanding that the resurrection is for some time, who knows exactly when, in the later future. But actually the same problem occurs in English. The Greek form is just a general future. It could mean later future, it could mean near future, it could mean any time in the future. But when we translate into English, there is the option of specifying immediate future. Your brother is about to rise again. And we use that in English to talk about the close, near future. And if we say your brother will rise again, that could most naturally be taken as referring to some unspecified time in the future. But as the words stand in Greek, the same with Aramaic, which Jesus was probably using when he spoke to Martha, they could mean either. So Jesus' word here had an interesting ambiguity, which Martha picks up one side of it, and then she has to realize, hey, did he mean something different? What is he talking about? A very close event, perhaps. This isn't the only time Jesus makes an ambiguous mistake, an ambiguous statement that gives his hearers a lot of food for thought. For example, he said to Nicodemus, you must be born again, which Nicodemus at first takes to mean normal physical birth. And then Nicodemus has a lot to chew over in his mind as the conversation continues, and for many days and years afterwards. Okay, continuing with our grammar pass. Now we have apen, which is the past form of lege. So this is a bit of style variation here. We had says Jesus to Martha, says Martha to Jesus, and now we have said Jesus to her. Ego eimi, I am the Anastasis and the Zoe. These are both nouns. In the nominative case, which is used for subject, the subject of the sentence. Apistion es eme, and ego eme is the accusative case of ego. Ego is the nominative used for the subject, and eme is the accusative. And the accusative case, first approximation, is used to indicate the object of the sentence, but in this case, we use it because of the ace. We saw in a previous verse that we put the noun in the dative when it's followed by n, but here we're putting the noun, or in this case a pronoun, in the accusative because it's used with ace. So different prepositions must take different cases. N takes the dative and ace takes the accusative. And then we have here, I've commented on this before in other lessons, the S here is a characteristic of the future, and this ending is third person singular, so he will live. And just a comment here, pisteuo eis is John's special expression for saving faith. I discussed this in previous lessons when we found it in John chapter 2 verse 11 and 3 verse 16. These are my numbered Greek lessons. Traditional versions translate this pisteuo eis word for word as believe in. So this is, yes, a word-for-word translation, and I would call it a first approximation translation. But when we're looking at really what does believe in mean in normal English, often we use it like this: despite your past failures, Fred, I believe in you still. I still think you can do it. So this is not quite the type of thing that pisteuo eis is talking about. We also say, do you believe in the tooth fairy? Meaning, do you believe that some mythical creature exists? So again, that's not quite what we want either. So because of this, I maintain that believe in is not a good translation if looked at from the point of view of what do these English words normally use? What do ordinary people who don't know anything about the Bible understand by this phrase, believe in? And I think these two examples show that it's not really what we want for translating pisteuo eis. And I discussed this in my lesson on John 3:16, where I said, and this is not just my idea, that there are plenty who agree with me, but the difficulty is when people are attached to their traditional translations that are, I would maintain, overly literal and stuck on what's really only a first approximation translation. But it really, in plain normal English, what pisteuo eis really means is to give your trust and allegiance to someone, to join up with him, to accept his leadership. I think that's important. Accept his leadership. So pisteuo eis. So moving on, verse 26. Kai pas hozon, kai pisteuon. These are participles. Eis eme. And again, this is the accusative case, going with eis, and the nominative one is ego. Ume, now this is interesting because these are two different negative words in Greek, and here we have them used both together. Sometimes in English, or in what some people take as logic, they would say a double negative makes a positive. Two minuses make a plus. But not in this case. The double negative is emphatic. Will definitely not. We could say will never ever die. especially with this, ever, iona, ever. Pistues. Now we come to the present. This eis ending indicates the present, second person singular. Do you believe this? Oh, and one more thing, the iona is in the accusative case, used with eis, as we saw before. And another comment before we move on to look at the last verse. Another comment on the words of Jesus in verses 25 and 26. And I've written they're striking in their simplicity and power. They contain a surface paradox and a deep truth. Notice the ABBA sequence, die, live, live, die. And Jesus uses each word here in two meanings, physical life and death, and spiritual life and death. But it creates a surface paradox, as I said. Even the one who believes in me, even though he die, he will live. And the living one who believes in me will never ever die. So there we have die, die, live, living, die. So very interesting way that Jesus has expressed this. Again, as I said before, very much giving food for thought. It's a surface paradox. So at first it seems that it doesn't make sense. But when you think about it, you realize, hey, he's using these words in different senses. And just a comment here too, what I often say, the Bible is not a theology textbook. Because in a textbook, the words have clearly defined meanings that are stuck to. But Jesus is different. He throws out a word in an unexpected meaning. And the whole aim of it is to make people think. And what he has created here is a striking, startling statement, very neatly, very wonderfully, brilliantly expressed, that encapsulates this truth which is at first paradoxical, life out of death. And it's set out here so neatly, so tidily, and so powerfully. So I've written that down here. In scientific or theological textbook language, words are carefully defined and then consistently used in the defined senses. But here Jesus deliberately plays on the two possible senses of live and die. This forces you to think carefully about what he is saying. It's interesting too that the word eis is used twice, again in slightly different meanings, but the fact that it is used twice creates a nice link between the two phrases. Opisteuon eis eme ume apothane eis ton iona. The one who believes in me, gives his allegiance to me, will not die eis ton iona, forever, will never ever die. Okay, and now just completing our grammar pass. She says to him, yes, Lord, I have believed. So, and this is a perfect. And there are two characteristics of the perfect, this K here, and then what's called the reduplication at the beginning, where the pi, it's called in Greek P, is repeated with a different vowel here. But so those two things characterize the perfect. And the first approximation meaning of the perfect is I have believed. But in this case, I think a better translation is, as the Good News Bible, the Good News translation says, I do believe. Because I think the perfect is used here to make the strong affirmation as we would in English. I do believe. Then we come to, that you are. So these are both singular. This is the freestanding form of the pronoun, and this is a form of the verb to be, which we would translate in English as are. But of course in English, you could be singular or plural. But in Greek, su means you singular. And final comment, eis ton kosmon. Again, it's accusative case because it's following eis. So the nominative or the normal form of the word is cosmos. Now our third pass through, we look at some English words that come from these Greek words, and we'll look at this anastasetai. Now this word was translated part by part into Latin. Ana, re, or again, and stasetai, surrect, or stand. So this is where we get the word resurrection. It comes straight from Latin, and the Latin word comes from the Greek, translated part by part. Adelphos, the name of the city. Phila, meaning love. Delphia, the brothers. Adelphos, Delphia. I guess the A goes as well. Eschaté, the last day. From this we get the word eschatology, study of the end times. Ego, of course we've borrowed that directly, ego, and eimi, am. These two words are interesting because we get English words from the Greek in two different ways. One is when the Greek word is just borrowed, it's been borrowed into English, usually maybe relatively recently, but the word has just been lifted and borrowed. But these two words, which you can see are similar, eimi and am, they are similar because Greek and English are cousin languages, technically known as cognate. So it's a bit like if you see cousins, they might look a little bit alike. A lot of things about cousins may be quite different, but some things about cousins look alike. And these two words resemble, not because this was borrowed into English, but because English and Greek are cousin languages. These two words are the same because this word was simply borrowed. But these two words are similar because of Greek and English being cousin languages. Now here's another one which is just borrowed, Anastasis, the name Anastasia, and Zoe. And from this word has been borrowed to give, again, the name Zoe. And just finishing the last two verses. Eme, yeah, and so we get me. Again, that's because these are cousin words, believes in me. Just cross off the E at the front, and there they are, virtually identical. And this word, as we noted before, the base form of it, or the nominative form, is cosmos, and again this word has been borrowed into English, so we talk about the cosmos. And now I just want to conclude by reading again these two verses, which must just about rank as my favorite verses out of the Greek New Testament, and I've memorized them, which I recommend for anyone to do. Ego eimi he anastasis kai he zoe. Hopistuon eis eme kan apothane zesetai. Even though he die, he or she will live. Kai, and moreover, pas hozon, everyone living and believing, kai pistuon eis eme, ou me apothane eis ton iona, will never ever die.